Testing. You know what I've always found really funny about the United States? We love to take pride in the fact that we are the #1 country in the world, despite the fact that we don't rank #1 in a lot of things, actually. Just to name some examples, we do not rank #1 in terms of life expectancy, happiness, or social progress. And when we do rank #1 in something, it isn't always worth bragging about. But here's a statistic that might just blow your mind. The Economist Intelligence Unit is a UK-based research firm which compiles a yearly ranking of the countries of the world known as the Democracy Index, scoring each country on how democratic their governments and societies are on a scale from 0 to 10. The formula they use to calculate these scores is a little too complicated to get into detail, but do know that it does include important factors such as how free and fair a government's elections are, government functionality, and citizen participation in the electoral process. According to their 2018 data, released in their 2019 report, the United States ranks 25th in the world with a score of 7.96, giving it the categorization of a flawed democracy. In other words, we are not the most democratic country in the world. Just to put that into perspective, we rank lower than our neighbor up north, 15 European countries, both Australia and New Zealand, South Korea and Japan, 3 Latin American countries, and an African nation. Now, when I found this out, I was understandably shocked. I mean, we've gone to war, we've killed people, we've laid down our lives for the idea of democracy, and yet we can't even claim to be the torchbearers? I wanted to get to the bottom of this. Admittedly, I've been a total geek when it comes to American politics and elections since I was about 13, so I already had some ideas in mind. Eventually, I came up with a number of ways that we could improve our standing on the Democracy Index. But today, I want to talk about just one. We Americans are used to electing our politicians through first-past-the-post voting, otherwise known as FPTP. It's a very simple system that most of you are probably already familiar with. In essence, the candidate who wins the most votes wins the election. This is the system that we use to elect our governors, our state judges, city council members, mayors, county heads, heck, even the members of our local sanitary boards are elected this way. And that is a problem. See, first past the post wasn't designed to produce outcomes that accurately reflect the will of the people. In fact, I would go as far as to say that first past the post directly violates one of the core principles upon which all our elected governments are founded upon, and that is consent of the governed. Because far too often in our nation, politicians win office without winning a majority of the vote. That's exactly what happened in our state in 2006. That year, Rick Perry ran and won for re-election as our governor, but he only won 39% of the vote. That year, 61% of Texas voters ended up being governed by a decision made by only a minority of the electorate. And that wasn't just a one-time occurrence either. I went back and looked at every state governor's race that took place between 2010 and 2019. And of the 146 elections that took place, 32 produced outcomes where a governor was elected without winning a majority of the vote. In other words, 1 out of every 5 governors elected during this 10-year period. But that's nothing compared to how first past the post messes with the way that we elect our legislatures. Just as a refresher, I'll be using a hypothetical country, the Fruit Republic. Elections to our legislatures work as follows. There are a set number of representatives, each representing a geographic district. Each district has a roughly equal population and elects one representative. The winners in each district make up the legislature. This is what I like to call a double whammy in terms of messed up representation. You not only have the problem that we began with, where most of the voters in a district can end up being represented by someone they didn't vote for, you now also have the problem of the total party vote not matching the composition of the legislature. In this hypothetical election, 40% of voters chose banana party candidates. But because the strawberry party won the popular vote in more individual districts, they wound up with more seats. The banana party's representation was nearly cut in half, and the lime party, despite winning 10% of the vote, ended up with 0 representation. It's not hard to find real-world examples of this scenario playing out in our country. In 2018, Michigan Republicans retained their control over the state's House and Senate, even though Democratic candidates won a majority of the popular vote for both offices. That also happened that year in Arizona, and North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Needless to say, the way that we elect our politicians is problematic and tends to generate a number of negative consequences. When we have a system that routinely ignores how most voters feel and puts parties and politicians in power that are unpopular with most people, they feel like their voices aren't being heard and are less likely to come out to vote. Accusations of spoiling elections demonize people who vote for minor party candidates or those who run for minor parties for exercising their basic democratic rights to run for office and vote. And our district-based elections to our legislatures allows political parties in power to rig elections in their favor through a process known as gerrymandering, where candidates can end up winning more seats even though the party lost the popular vote. We have some problems on our hands, and I have some solutions. I propose we switch to 2 different election systems. One for elections that determine one winner, offices like governor and state attorney general, and one for elections that determine our legislative bodies, our city councils and state houses. Now comes the difficult part for me, explaining how these systems work without boring you to death. I'll give it my best shot. Ranked choice voting, or RCV, is a system that allows voters to rank their candidates by order of preference. Voters are given as many votes as there are candidates and can rank as many candidates as they please. On the first count, only first preference votes are tabulated. If no candidate wins a majority of the vote on the first round, the candidate who won the least amount of votes is eliminated. From here, the voters who pick the eliminated candidate as their first choice have their second preferences transferred over to the remaining candidates. This process of elimination and transfer continues until one candidate reaches a majority of the vote. Implementing this system has immediate benefits. For one, states like Georgia and Louisiana that use runoffs to determine winners at a later date would no longer have to hold another election. RCV conducts an automatic runoff as the votes are counted, saving money on having to hold another election and relieving the burden of having to vote twice on voters. RCV also fundamentally changes the way campaigns operate. Instead of being encouraged to spend millions on attack ads against their opponents, candidates are actually encouraged to reach out to all kinds of voters in order to win the second, third, and fourth preferences of their opponents. And because voters feel less pressured into voting between the lesser of two evils, candidates that fall outside of the two-party system have a greater chance of winning power. Although not a lot of studies have been done on ranked choice voting in the United States, due to the fact that only a select few places use this system, the data that we do have tells us the following. According to a number of studies done by the pro-voting reform group Fair Vote, people who live in ranked choice voting cities understand how the system works about as well as they understand first past the post. In addition, citizens who live in cities that use RCV are more likely to be satisfied with the conduct of their campaigns and are less likely to remember candidates attacking each other. And ranked choice voting is popular among minority voters. These benefits have convinced jurisdictions across the United States to make the switch to ranked choice voting. Major cities including San Francisco, Santa Fe, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Portland, Maine, have begun using ranked choice voting to conduct their municipal elections, with future use approved in the cities of Memphis and New York City. It's also worth noting that the state of Maine approved twice in two separate referendums, one in 2016 and one in 2018, to use ranked choice voting for all statewide elections. In November 2018, Maine became the first state in the union's history to use RCV to conduct its primary and general elections, and this November will become the first state to use that system to allocate its presidential electors. With all this recent momentum surrounding RCV, I'd like to think that its widespread use is within our near future. But this next system might take a little bit longer to catch on. Proportional representation, PR. There are many different flavors of proportional representation, but they all boil down to one principle. The percentage of the vote a party receives on election day should roughly equal the percentage of the seats they win in the legislature. In other words, if the Banana Party candidate won 40% of the vote, they should be entitled to 40% of the seats. But as we now know, first past the post can't guarantee such representative results. And while voters would like for their votes to be accurately reflected in the makeup of their government, they still like the idea of having local representatives to advocate for local interests. But as it turns out, we can have it both ways. Did you know there is an election system that allows voters to keep their local representatives while keeping the legislature as a whole proportional to how people voted? It's called mixed member proportional. And to demonstrate how it works, let's return to the Fruit Republic as it gears up for its first election under MMP. This time around, half of the seats will be elected via district, just as we Americans are accustomed to. But the other half will be awarded based on the national popular vote for each party. We'll get to exactly how these seats are apportioned later. Before Election Day, each party participating in the election releases their list of candidates for the 10 proportional seats. The candidates are listed from 1 to 10 on each list. On Election Day, voters are given a ballot with 2 votes, one for a district representative and one directly for a party. If a voter believes that a Banana Party candidate would be the best choice for their district, but would like to see the Blueberry Party in power, they are free to split their vote that way. After all the votes are counted, the Banana Party wins 7 of the district seats, and the Strawberry Party wins 3. In terms of the popular vote, the Banana Party and the Strawberry Party both win 40% of the vote, and Blueberry wins 20%. The party vote thus shows how the voters want the final proportions of the legislature to look like. The proportional seats are then allocated as follows. Since both the Banana Party and Strawberry Party won 40% of the vote, they are entitled to 8 out of the 20 seats each. So, Banana is given 1 of the proportional seats, which will be filled by the first candidate on their list. The Strawberry Party will fill 5 of the seats, which will be filled by the top 5 candidates on their list. And the remaining 4 seats will be filled by the top 4 Blueberry candidates. And that's how MMP works. It's actually not that complicated. Examples of places that use MMP include Bolivia, Germany, Lesotho, and New Zealand. In addition, the British regions of Scotland, Wales, and London use MMP to elect their regional parliaments. Both New Zealand and Lesotho are the most recent countries to adopt this system for national elections, New Zealand in '93 and Lesotho in '02. And the results of these switches could not be more clear. The number of political parties represented in each country's legislature has increased dramatically, and the results closely mirror how citizens actually voted. These countries also serve as great examples of how MMP encourages parties to cooperate with each other. Since adopting the system in 1993, no election in New Zealand has produced an outcome where one single party has won a majority of the seats, forcing the largest party to cooperate with smaller parties in order to form coalition governments, agreeing to pursue common policy proposals, and offering concessions when necessary. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Political parties working together towards common policy proposals, offering concessions for the greater good of government. Those words usually don't go together in American English, but they can. We don't have to be complacent in the status quo. If we don't want to be ruled by politicians that are unpopular, we don't have to. If we don't want to be governed by a party that most voters rejected at the ballot box, we don't have to. If we don't want to have to constantly choose between the lesser of two evils when we step inside the polling booth every November, we don't have to. Fair and representative elections can take place within our lifetime. All it takes is for us to care enough to take action. I know my reason for caring. Before coming here, my parents never knew what it was like to live in a democratic country. Before coming here, they never knew what it was like to live in a country where they could have a voice in their government, where they could freely speak their minds. That's why they came to the US from Cuba. Sadly, today, Cuba is still not free. So while I have the liberty to live in a democratic country like ours, I dedicate my passion to improving our democracy to the billions around the world who yearn for even a sliver of what we experience here in America. And I especially dedicate my passion to my late grandmother, who passed away before she could see her country liberated from the shackles of dictatorship. So I urge you, join your local electoral reform group. Vote for candidates that want to reform our election system. Call your local representatives and tell them that the key to a better democracy is electoral reform. Thank you.